Are you someone who has put in a partition wall, maybe to divide up a room or finish off a basement, or maybe closed off a doorway, and now need to put up some drywall, like this wall right here that I repaired in the basement, and like this other wall? Well, this is a video for you. I am going to install drywall on this and the other wall, show you how to get around outlets, cut those out. So if you want to see the process of going from a wall like this to a wall like this that's ready to tape and mud and get prepared for paint, follow along and see how it's done. Let's get started. Now, because this wall was finished once before and I had to cut some drywall out of it in order to get to this wall to repair it, I already had drywall finished, and this is where the two pieces join together, and this is where the tape joint went. When I finish drywall, I don't use a lot of material. I use just enough to bed the tape. Then I put a second thin coat over the top to cover it, and then finally I do a little bit wider finish coat. That way I don't get humps in the drywall, bulges. The wall looks perfectly smooth all the way across. And so I'm going to just take some of that away. It's a little bit of a messy job, and that's why I want to do it before I put the new drywall up. And then when I put the new piece in, I have essentially a new joint on both sides where I can tape it and not have a bulge. Once I got that tape pulled away, is I took the chisel and just worked my way down along, out away from that joint, and just peeled away the rest of the drywall mud to make a nice smooth line along here, where I'm essentially back to the beginning, where I'll tape into where this paint line ends. Get some more of that drywall tape. Sometimes the easiest thing is just use a utility knife. Just be careful with that. You don't cut yourself. Cut away from yourself. Never cut towards yourself. That way if the knife slips, it goes away. Don't cut up towards yourself. You can have a serious problem with that. You can see how easily this cuts away once you get behind it. Trim that away. Now I'm going to take the chisel, peel away the rest of that tape that's left behind, and then go right down the wall and peel those other layers of mud away. Put a little pressure on it, and it's not too hard to do. A little bit of tape left there, got that off. Now this is actually not taking me very long to do, and it may seem like a lot of extra work, but it's going to create a much nicer job for you when you're all done. I'll just warn you though, it does leave quite a mess to clean up, and you want to be aware of the fact it will make some dust, so you want to cover anything up that is close by that you don't want to get drywall dust on. I also need to clean up along the ceiling here, where the drywall met with the ceiling drywall and the wall itself, and just a little bit of the mud that creeped into the joint there, taking that off. But the important thing here is I don't use texture paint except on the ceiling, and I will use a very light sand texture. And before I try to tape this in, I need to take the chisel and just take it along here and knock down that little bit of sand texture so it doesn't interfere when I'm trying to mud the joint in between the wall and the ceiling. Just a little detail. If you have some texture you're dealing with and you're going to tie some drywall back into that. There, both sides are set and ready to go, and the top is cleaned up and that's ready too. It's time to start cutting some drywall to put it in place. I'm going to start with that back wall in the other room because I have a 10-foot sheet I'm using for that because I have sections that are just under 5 feet tall. So rather than buy an 8-foot sheet and waste an end of it, I can get 2 sections out of a 10-foot piece. So I measured what I need over there and then made the marks on the drywall. I have my drywall square in place to aid in cutting. What I do, because I don't trust this square to stay in place where it should, I don't just mark the one line along the edge. I mark a second spot further down and hold the square in place with those marks, because otherwise sometimes it'll drift on you. I don't have to draw a line, but I do draw a line just so I've got a visual reference to make sure I'm staying in place. And I realize I'm cutting drywall. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I've got my marks made, my square in place, and a fresh sharp blade. So I'm going to score the drywall. And I'm violating my very first rule here about cutting with a utility knife. I'm cutting towards my leg, but I'm going very slowly, and before I get to the bottom, just before I make the last bit of cut here, I'm going to get my leg out of the way. Make sure you keep your fingers out of the way when you're cutting. Off to the side. Cut is made. Pull the piece away from the wall a little bit so I've got some room to work. And then snap it. I have to get to the other side now and cut along the back side. And we have a piece of drywall ready to carry over and install. Got this piece sitting in place, and you'll notice something. I've got a 1/2 inch thick scrap of plywood sitting on the bottom because I always leave a 1/2 inch gap above the floor line when I put drywall in. That prevents any problems with moisture coming up into the drywall. It keeps it well away from the floor. So I use that spacer to get everything set in place and aligned. Once this is partially screwed in at the top, I can pull that out and then finish screwing in the rest of the drywall. Before I set this piece in place though, I have to cut out for the outlet. If I was going to be putting up a lot of drywall on a couple of walls with a lot of outlets, in the past I would just use my SpiraCut Rotozip with the proper bit on it and get a reference mark roughly where that outlet was, and then put this drywall in place and use the outlet box as a guide to cut it out and pop it into place. 2 problems with that. I haven't done it for a while, and if you're not careful when you're using that around plastic boxes, you can end up cutting into the box. Plus, these are all installed now. I'm going to try to go around it. So what I'm going to do instead is get my reference mark of how far from the joint the side of the box is here and how far from the floor the bottom of the piece of drywall the bottom of the box is. Get a reference mark on here, take another box and draw the square out and cut it with my utility knife before setting it in place. It's a little bit slower, but on the other hand, it's also not as messy because I've got TV down here, musical instruments. I don't want to make a lot of dust, and this SpiraCut makes an awful lot of dust. So we're going to do it the old-fashioned way and cut it out with a utility knife. Now I could use a keyhole saw, but that's kind of messy too, so I can do it quickly with a utility knife. The outlet opening has been cut. I checked it. So we're going to slide this piece into place, get it positioned. Just going to double check here to make sure I'm plumb. One little tap here, make sure we're in. And we're going to secure this. Now, I'm fortunate. Years ago when I did this, I always had to take very careful attention to where the stud marks were. I'd have to do a little mark at each stud line on a 16-inch center, so I would always stay straight up and down getting into the studs. Well, now the drywall comes with these little X's in it that show where the 16-inch center is. All I have to do is put a screw in here, 1.25" drywall screw with my drywall driver bit here that releases once I'm in far enough. Get one started here. Make sure we're up tight. Screw is set in place. Get one started over here. And we'll be all set. Then we can put the rest of the screws in and this piece will be secured. Now I'm going to take this little piece of spacer out before I get it all tightened in, because it gets real hard to remove once you've got everything fastened and secured. Screw the rest of this in and we'll go on to the next sheet. I'm about to cut the last piece that's going to go in on that wall in the back room. I've got the two larger pieces in that are the full 48-inch width. I have to put one smaller piece in now, again about 52 inches tall, but roughly 32 inches wide to fit into that remaining gap. Now, it was easy to cut it to the height I need. Just find my mark, use a drywall square cut and snap it. But now I've got to cut about a 32-inch wide piece here, and to get my mark, I marked it, and I know what my dimension is from the top of the square down to here. Hold my pencil on that point and just pull the square across the drywall, and that marks a line right where it needs to be for cutting this. I'll cut it, I'll score it, I'll snap it, cut that off, and I will have the piece I need for that back wall. Now before I cut it, I'm going to turn this up. I don't want to cut it with it sitting on its side. That would cause a problem and that might not break evenly. I'm going to cut it like I would a normal sheet of drywall. We'll score that line. And over time, when you do a lot of this, you get used to doing it freehand along the pencil line. It's pretty accurate. You just need a steady hand. All right, we can break that. I always start on the back side from the bottom, so I've got control of the piece. Get enough of a bend in it to guide the knife. Now when I get to the top, cut that last little bit, I've got control. Set my scrap piece off to the side. And I've got the piece I need ready to put in. For the piece set in place, sometimes a little thing I do is I take my pry bar rather than the spacer on the bottom. If I want to get a nice snug fit and it's not exact on the bottom, I just ease it up with the pry bar, get it in place, lined up on the sides, drop a screw in to hold it in place. Now I can pull my pry bar out and I can finish putting in the rest of the screws and get this thing fastened into place. And we'll go ahead and do that. Unfortunately, as sometimes happens when you're doing stuff like this, you break something, you got a little damaged spot. I damaged this, moving the drywall around. I caught the corner of it and chipped it as I was putting the piece back up into place. So this is an easy one to fix. This is where the baseboard goes. It's towards the bottom. It's right at the joint. So I am just going to move this quick square over, put it in place, use it as a guide. I'm going to mark here and cut that bad spot out. And then I'm going to get a dimension, take this over to a scrap piece of drywall and cut a little corner piece to go in, drop a couple screws in, and once I'm done taping and getting the baseboard up, you won't even know it's damaged. The bottom of this other piece to the spot where I cut that out, I've got 3 3/4 of an inch, so I am going to mark that on this piece. That's my starting point. I'm going to slide this over my quick square, make my mark, and that should be roughly the distance here, which should be 3 3/4 as well. Now, we'll take the quick square, move that into place and mark a line. Take the knife and score that. Get it started really well and deep. These don't break as well when you have such a short section, so that's why I have a board underneath. I can cut most of the way through this to get a good clean cut on it. Get this out of the way and finish that cut. Check it on the back side here, see why it won't come loose. A little bit of a piece there. All right, we have that cut. Push this out of the way. Check this out, see if it fits. Okay, we're pretty good there. I'm going to take a couple screws and put that in place. One in the bottom, on that bottom plate. And throw one in here on the side. And there, we've got a piece patched in there. We'll just tape, mud that. Baseboard will go over the top. We won't even know it's there. And with that, the wall in the back room is ready to tape and mud, as is the wall in this room, ready to tape and mud. That concludes this portion of getting this wall back in shape. We've framed it, insulated it, vapor barrier up, drywall's in place. Next up, in the next video, I'll show you how to get this taped and mudded and ready for paint. If you've enjoyed today's video and have gotten some good out of it, well then please click like and consider subscribing to our channel. I like putting this sort of stuff together. It's the stuff that I need to do around here, and I've got a lot of experience doing it, and I enjoy sharing it with you in these videos on how to do this stuff. So again, thank you for watching, and until next time, take care and enjoy your projects.